What's going on, everyone? It's Jordan Tackman, your friend in solar and real estate and business and just all around your friend. Report streaming from the hospital where I get to do more fun tests and stuff for my post cancer, post graft versus host, whatever, I don't know. But anyway, the point of this stream here is we have Solar United Neighbors. We're going to share into their Zoom video about this, but basically, as you might have heard, the Arizona utility regulator, the Arizona Corporations Commission, or the ACC, I guess, they voted in August to decrease the solar export rate for TEP, APS, and another smaller utility company by about 10%. At the upcoming October 11th open meeting, they're expected to vote on whether or not they're going to reopen the value of solar decision, allowing them to decrease the export rate by an additional 10% this year. And then the reopening could lead to the other significant changes, like eliminating the 10-year lock-in, removing grandfathering for net metering customers, increasing the the step down that's supposed to happen every year, the 10% step down, the annual step down. So the big thing that we're trying to reach out to people is saying, hey, like, we need your help. There is an attack on solar in Arizona. Here's what you could do to make your voices heard. They're going to explain pretty much how to break it down. I'm going to be putting out a flyer a little bit later as well. There'll be some links kind of in the replay of this. If you go to my YouTube channel, that's where the replay will be kind of held. I'll do my best to kind of post the links as well during this, but big thing there is, we could write letters to the commissioners. You can show up to the hearing. Again, that's October 11th. It's an open hearing. Just show up by 9:30. You can do a call in. I'm going to give you all the instructions on how to register. Solar United Neighbors is going to as well. But we want to jump in there and really kind of get them patched in on it. So let's it looks like it already started. So let's patch it in and go from there.
Panelists, none of us can hear you. Everybody's on mute. If you have a question and we want to answer your questions, please use the Q&A button, which should be down at the bottom of your screen. There's also a chat button that you can click, but just keep in mind, everybody can view that. So use that for chatting and conversations with each other. But if you have a question for one of the panelists about the issues tonight, please use the Q&A button if possible. I'm really thankful to be joined tonight by two giants in their fields. Kate Bowman is the Interior West Regulatory Director for Vote Solar. Kate will be giving us some of the background information tonight on the issue. Autumn Johnson is the Executive Director of the Arizona Solar Energy Industries Association, also known as ARISEA, and she'll be talking through some of the impacts of the Corporation Commission's decision on homeowners and also the industry. And then my name is Adrian Keller. I'm the Arizona Program Director for Solar United Neighbors. I live in Phoenix, and I've been with Sun for about 2 years now. And I will be closing us out tonight by showing folks how to make a public comment at the Corporation Commission, as well as some suggested talking points to convey your message on this issue. And I sort of just covered everything here, but certainly we'll be going over the background of the issue, the industry perspective, how this will impact homeowners, and also how this will impact prospective solar homeowners. And then we'll close out with how to get involved in the issue. With that, I'd love to kick things off with Kate.
Thanks, Adrian. Hi, everybody. Kate Bowman again with Vote Solar, and appreciate the chance to speak with you all tonight. I'm going to start with a quick introduction just of who the Arizona Corporation Commission is and some history before turning things over to Autumn to talk to you a little bit more about what's happening right now and why we're all here this evening. So just to start with, I'm sure most folks are familiar with the Arizona Corporation Commission, but I'm just going to talk a little bit about who they are and what they do. And all states have a commission that's like the ACC that's in charge of regulating utilities, but the ACC is actually a little bit unique from other states in several ways. First of all, the ACC was created as a constitutionally formed body, and so is actually a separate agency that's independent of the legislature and the executive branch and the judicial branch, whose specific job is to protect consumers and to do that by regulating large corporations and in particular utilities. The purpose of the ACC is really to balance the power that large corporations have with the needs of ordinary people. And the commission is a forum where really important issues related to public utilities are decided. The ACC does have other important jobs outside of regulating utilities, like ensuring railroad and pipeline safety and regulating the sale of securities. And the mission of the Corporation Commission as it relates to utilities is to ensure safe, reliable, and affordable utility services. They regulate 14 different electricity utilities across the state, and that includes Arizona Public Service and Tucson Electric Power. It does not include SRP, interestingly, for any potential SRP customers who might be out there. And the commission has oversight and authority over a wide variety of the things that utilities do, including how much utilities can charge different types of customers for electricity, and reviewing and overseeing how utilities plan to meet the energy needs of their customers now and in the future. Arizona is one of only 14 states where commissioners are actually elected instead of appointed. And there are 5 commissioners who are each elected at large, which means they represent the whole state rather than a particular part of the state or a particular district. Each commissioner serves a 4-year term, and they can serve up to 2 consecutive terms. And your current commissioners as of January 2023 are here on this slide. Next slide. So before introducing some of the changes that have been proposed, I'm going to start with a quick review of net metering, which is a policy that's really foundational to the success of rooftop solar across the country. Net metering is a billing mechanism that's used when homes and businesses have rooftop solar and they're exporting energy to the grid. And net metering is the mechanism where those homes and businesses are compensated for energy they export to the grid. And under net metering, each kilowatt hour of energy that's exported to the grid is credited, and the customer exporting the energy receives a credit on their utility bill that can be redeemed to offset the purchase of an equivalent kilowatt hour from the utility. So it's a pretty simple and relatively easy to understand way to compensate customers with rooftop solar when energy is exported to the grid. This map shows a summary of state solar policies, and the text is a little bit small, but the blue and the dark blue indicate states that have a net metering policy in place right now. And the map's from 2021, so it's a little bit out of date, but what you can see is that the majority of the states across the country do still have a net metering policy in place. Next slide. So to turn us back to Arizona specifically, nearly 10 years ago, the Arizona Corporation Commission began a process of evaluating net metering and deciding whether to replace it with a different method of compensating solar customers for energy exported to the grid. And the commission began this proceeding to explore whether to end net metering and what to replace it with in 2014, and it continued until a final decision that was issued in 2017. So this proceeding was known as the Value of Solar Docket. And it was a litigated proceeding, which means that every party that was involved in the proceeding was represented by a lawyer, and each party had the chance to present evidence to the commission or provide experts who shared sworn testimony under oath in a hearing in order to ensure the commission was considering the best possible information from all the parties who were interested in this decision when they made their decision. The proceeding took 3 years, and there were nearly 20 parties involved in the proceeding. Vote Solar and Aristia were both parties to this proceeding. So the commission had mountains of evidence and sworn testimony to consider over the course of 3 years when making this decision. And there were opportunities for members of the public to comment on the proceeding as well. And so, it was a complicated, very complicated and long proceeding, but just to summarize it quickly, that, it was really a thorough investigation of the issues that we're talking about today. And then in 2017, the ACC voted 4-1 to end net metering for any new future customers with solar, and they replaced it with a rate that's named the Resource Comparison Proxy Rate, or it's abbreviated often as the RCP. And what the RCP is it's intended to be a proxy for the cost of building a utility scale solar project. Since rooftop solar helps to avoid the need for the utility to go out and build new energy resources, it's a sort of a substitute for what the utility can avoid when customers put rooftop solar on their own homes. The RCP and the value of the RCP is also intended to include the avoided cost of transmitting energy to customers, because when solar energy is produced on your rooftop or on your neighbor's rooftop, it doesn't require the same large investments in transmission and distribution poles and wires that you need to get energy from a power plant to customers. So as you can see at the bottom of this slide, in the years since the RCP was implemented, the value has gone down relative to the retail rate. And this shows what the RCP is in effect today. If you were, someone who's looking at installing solar right now, the RCP in effect right now is about 7.6 cents per kilowatt hour for APS customers, and it's 6.3 cents per kilowatt hour for TEP customers. Next slide. So the Commission's decision also included some important protections to address customers who already had solar when this decision was made or who were considering installing solar in the future. So first of all, the Commission recognized that existing solar customers had already made a long-term investment in solar panels based on the expectation that they would save money on their bills over a really long period of time, potentially 20 years or longer. So the Commission decided that anyone who had solar before the decision was issued in January 2017 would remain on net metering as a legacy customer for 20 years. The second decision came about because the Commission recognized that when people install solar, it's really important to be able to make a reasonable prediction about how much you'll save on energy costs over, again, a long period of time into the future in order to decide whether it's a good investment for you. So when an individual household installs solar, they can lock in the resource comparison proxy rate that's in effect on the date that they interconnect their system to the grid for 10 years. And then third, the ACC decided that it was important to have a stable transition from net metering towards the resource comparison proxy rate. So the Commission decided that the value of the RCP would start at the retail rate for electricity, so very comparable to net metering, and step down to the RCP value gradually over time, no more than 10% each year. So what this did is ensure that there was some stability in the market, and someone who wasn't able to go solar in 2017 wasn't much worse off just because they decided to go solar in 2018 or 2019 or one of the following years. So for folks who have solar, you should recognize based on when you installed which of these applies to you, whether you're a net metering customer or whether you are receiving the RCP rate in exchange for the energy you export to the grid. And then for prospective solar customers, anyone who's thinking about it, those protections are in place to ensure that the RCP value declines gradually, and whatever it is when you install, you can know you'll have that rate for locked in for 10 years in order to be able to predict how much you'll save. And so with that, I'll turn things over to Autumn to talk a little bit about some recent events at the Commission.
Thanks, Kate. Before I get going, I just want to mention one thing about something that Kate brought up, which is that the Commission does not regulate SRP, but you all, if you're SRP customers, still elect commissioners. They are elected statewide, and so SRP customers very much have the opportunity to vote for commissioners. And so I think this information is still really relevant to you as a voter, but also is important to the extent that the health of the solar industry matters to you. And we'll talk about why that's important for Arizona's economy in a couple of slides, but there is something for everyone to be concerned about with what we're talking about today. So please stick with us until we get to the action items at the end. So one thing that Kate mentioned also is that the utilities, the regulated utilities, namely TEP, APS, and UNSC, file compliance documents every year where they are allowed to reduce this RCP or export rate by up to 10%. That's really important. So it can be 10% or less that they reduce it by. They do not have to reduce it by 10% every single year. The utilities filed their compliance filings as they normally do in the summer, and within the parameters of the value of solar decision, and was certainly a decision that a commission was able to make at that time. Our current slate of commissioners thought, or at least there was a proposal that, hey, we skipped it 1 year, so let's do it 20% this year. And we made the argument again that that was not lawful, that it's an up to 10%. And so in any year, the commission can lawfully reduce it by less than 10% if they so choose, which is what they decided to do in 2020. Commissioner Myers then withdrew that second amendment to drop it by 20%, and they decided that they would evaluate whether or not to just revisit the entire original decision from 2017 at the October open meeting. So next week on October 11th, the commission is going to vote on whether or not to reopen the value of solar decision, which is the decision that Kate went through blow by blow as to what it does. And so in the open meeting agenda, they actually itemize the 3 things that they want to talk about. They would like to talk about increasing the annual reduction beyond 10%, and that would dramatically impact new customers. They want to revisit the 10-year RCP lock-in rate, and that would affect new customers, but also potentially anyone that's installed solar since 2018. And they want to look at this grandfathering provision for folks that had installed solar before the value of solar decision. So folks that had installed solar prior to 2018 and that 20-year lock-in. Next slide, please. So let's talk about a little bit about why this is super important for the industry. So in Arizona, it's more than 8,000 people work in solar. It's about 8,300 something people that have solar related jobs. It's a pretty significant number of people in one of the sunniest states in the country. Cumulatively, we're talking about $16 billion or so in market impact, and that was about $1.5 billion a year related to the state's economy. And we're already seeing significant declines in installation year over year, partially due to this export rate drop, but also due to extremely high interest rates. At this point, we're seeing interest rates anywhere from 8 to 11% to install solar, and that really impacts, obviously, the economics of the decision and sort of the break-even point, or the point in which you will recoup your investment based on your utility bill savings. Even the 10% step down in the RCP makes it harder and harder for projects to be economic for new customers. And so every year that you install solar, it takes longer and longer to recoup that investment, because the amount that you are getting from the utility for the surplus power that you provide is less and less. If they were to reopen the value of solar docket, not only could they change some of the things that I previously mentioned, but it could also just take years. As Kate mentioned, it was 3 years to sort it out the first time. The hearing itself was a year. And so you're talking about some period of complete unknown and uncertainty, which is obviously bad for an industry. And so you might be looking at a massive reduction in installations while people wait for the commission to figure out what in the world's going to happen. It's hard to argue that you should invest $30 or $40 or $50,000 into a solar system on your own home when you have absolutely no idea how the commission is going to treat that from a regulatory perspective tomorrow or next week or next month or next year, because they cannot be counted on to maintain the decisions that they've previously instituted. Let's go on to the next slide. Obviously, what I've just been touching on also has a big impact potentially on homeowners, right? And so I think what's really important to stress about what's happening next week at the Corporation Commission is this is not a problem for someone else. This is not a problem for future solar customers. This is a problem for anyone who has ever installed solar at any point, or someone who hopes to install solar in the future. Arguably, it's important for everyone else too, because the state's economy might be of interest to you. And also, if you have any kind of interest in a transition to clean energy, obviously, there might be direct implications regardless of the economics of individual solar systems. So let's talk a little bit about the specific impacts for homeowners. If you're an existing solar customer and they either undo grandfathering or they revisit the 10-year lock-in, whatever the deal you have is now with your utility about how much you're selling your surplus power back to is all up for debate and renegotiation again. And so if you're, locked in at 12 cents or 8 cents or whatever it is, you could be looking at, 3 to 5 cents after this decision if they are to modify it. That would mean that any amount of money that you put into your system is going to take longer to recoup, which is the break-even point. So if you, are an APS customer and you expected it to take 8 or 10 years for you to basically recoup the investment in the solar system based on the amount you save in your electric bills every month, that could be completely different. It could be 15 years, it could be 12 years, we don't know. You would see less overall savings from solar cumulatively, but also on a month-to-month basis, it could dramatically change the bills that you expect to see, especially in summer months. We would expect there to be a large increase in future installations, so a decrease in solar deployment. When you're looking at trend lines for installations of solar, we would be looking at potentially a really significant drop from 2023 and on. And if you want to install solar in the future, it's important because you might want to be installing solar. Let's say you had planned to do it next year. This wasn't a good year for you. You didn't have the capacity or the resources to do that right now, or maybe you want to wait out the interest rate issue. Well, if you're waiting out the interest rate issue, meanwhile, the Corporation Commission is changing the rules so that it goes to 3 cents instead of 7 cents like it is now, that's going to dramatically change your plans and probably make it very difficult for you to be able to install solar as you'd originally hoped if you're doing so to save money on your electric bills. I think that's all of my slides, and I'm going to turn it over. Oh, no, sorry, I have one more. And so I kind of have already been touching on this, but yes, if you installed solar before 2018, you could lose your grandfathering. If you've installed solar since 2018, you could lose your 10-year lock-in. And if you want to install solar in the future, basically the power that you export to the grid will be almost worthless, despite the fact that the utility is reselling it to your neighbors at the retail rate. And that's the end of my slides. And so Adrian, I'll turn it over to you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Autumn. I really hope that catches folks up to speed on the current issue of where we're at. So you're probably asking yourself what happens next. So the Corporation Commission is meeting on Wednesday, the 11th at 10 in the morning. And as Autumn mentioned, they're essentially considering 2 questions. The first is whether or not they should reopen the value of solar docket that led to the establishment of the current system, those RCP rates today. And then 2, whether they should open a new docket to consider changes to the lock-in rate for current solar owners, the no more than portion of that 10% decrease of the RCP rate, and again, legacy grandfathering protections for net metering customers. So we're sort of calling this meeting today to engage our members, also Vote Solar and Arisea members as well. And the most important thing that will have the biggest impact on this issue is if you are able to make a public comment at the meeting on October 11th at 10 o'clock in the morning. If you're not able to attend in person, you can call in or attend virtually, but hearing face-to-face from their constituents how this issue will affect them is going to have the greatest impact on the commissioners. We're also going to highly encourage you to email the commissioners to tell them your thoughts in written form as well. If you go to Solar United Neighbors action page on this issue, which my colleague is hopefully dropping in the chat right now, you can read about the background of this issue and send an email with 1 click to all 5 commissioners. We're also going to share the commissioners' individual email addresses with you. So again, you can fill them in on the personal reasons and your personal experiences of how their decisions could impact your solar and your life. Third, please tell your friends and your neighbors and your loved ones about this. There are almost 250,000 people in the state who already have solar, and I'm willing to bet a large chunk of them don't know their utility commission is considering such drastic changes. So if you have somebody in your life who has solar, please tell them about this issue so they can be informed, and urge them to also make public comment at the commission. And as Autumn mentioned, this will impact current solar owners, even from way, way back when, all the way up to people who want to go solar in the future. And finally, if this is an area of passion for you, I would encourage you to volunteer with SUN. We rely on a grassroots network of solar owners and supporters in the state to make a difference. So if this is something that you would like to engage with us on a more of a rolling basis, we would absolutely love to partner with you on that effort. So Autumn and Kate and I put together some talking points, some suggested talking points for when you're making public comment at the Arizona Corporation Commission. But I'm just going to preface all of this by saying, again, your personal story is going to be the most powerful public comment that you can make to the Corporation Commission. But if you don't have solar and you're just thinking about solar, or this is all brand new to you, hopefully this will be a helping starting point for you. So first, to take a tiny step back, why do we have a corporation commission, right? As Kate mentioned, we have monopoly utilities that provide us electricity in the state of Arizona. And in order to operate here, there's a regulatory body to watch over us, to represent our interests as Arizonans. And their goal is to maintain regulatory stability and certainty in the marketplace. Dramatically changing how solar bill credits work and messing with grandfathering protections does neither to maintain stability or certainty and is really counter to their goal, which again, let's remind, is to represent our interests. Second, considering major changes to the value of solar would cause uncertainty with homeowners and the solar industry. Like I said, there are about 250,000 Arizonans who already have solar installed today. These are families, small businesses, houses of worship, nonprofits that made private investments with the assurance from the commission that they would have certainty in their solar compensation rate and protection through grandfathering, depending on their circumstance. Changing the rules in the middle of the game will interfere with the private investments that thousands of people have already made in an attempt to lower their electricity costs. Without predictable rates, fewer Arizonans in the future will feel comfortable investing in solar. And the uncertainty of this whole issue is a big part of this entire issue. Future Arizonans, without the assurance that they will be fairly compensated for their excess solar generation, are not going to feel comfortable investing thousands of dollars of their own capital unless they have assurance that they will be able to save on their electricity bills. And then again, as Autumn mentioned, the solar industry itself would suffer and jobs would disappear. I talked to one solar installer last week, and they were saying, if this decision goes through and the ACC reduces RCP rates even more, I'm not confident that we will be able to operate in the state in future years. That's a really big deal. I mean, think about it. If you're a small business owner who mostly installs rooftop solar, you're not going to feel very confident right now in your ability to hire new staff or expand in the state, which is the exact thing that we should be doing as a state to move closer to even more solar and other clean energy solutions. And then finally, because of all of this, less distributed energy would end up being deployed, resulting in a more expensive energy mix for Arizona ratepayers. We know, and probably most of the people on this call know, that wind and solar are the cheapest sources of new electricity generation for utilities. But what we don't often think about is they also rely on rooftop solar and all that excess generation, again, to sell back to other customers of that utility. And so if changes are made to the way people are credited for their solar or with grandfathering protections, a lot less people are going to feel confident to be able to go solar in the state, meaning less solar on our grid, which means the utilities will have to rely even more so on dirty sources of electricity like gas or coal. And that means more expensive electricity for all of us. So to sum everything up here, the main ask when you go to the commission on Wednesday at 10 a.m. is please vote against reopening the value of solar docket that resulted in the establishment of solar export rates. And please do not open a new docket to consider changes to grandfathering protections and the resource comparison proxy rate. We will have these resources available for you, so don't worry about capturing all of this information right now. We would love to share some resources with you after this. So you may be thinking to yourself, I didn't even know we had a corporation commission before all this. How do I make public comment? I would love to tell you. So you can attend in person. The Corporation Commission hearing room is in downtown Phoenix at 1200 West Washington Street. We are going to be there starting at 9:30 a.m. because we're going to hold a press conference and hopefully get some media attention about this issue. So please, if you're able to join a little bit early so you can see that. But the meeting itself will start at 10 o'clock in the morning. If you go in person, you will sign in to speak and just indicate that you want to comment on agenda item 9. If you don't live in the Valley or going to Phoenix is not an option for you, you can also call into the meeting starting at 10 o'clock in the morning on Wednesday. You can call that number and you will need to enter in a passcode. And again, for those interested, we will share this information with you. Somebody's going to pick up and they'll ask, what item would you like to comment on? And you will say agenda item 9, please, the value of solar. They will place you on a hold until it is your time to speak, after which they will unmute you. Either way, you will get 3 minutes to address the commission. Always start by greeting and thanking the commissioners for the opportunity to speak. Be as respectful as possible and ask them to vote no on reopening the value of solar decision. Again, like I said, any personal story or personal impact you can share here is really powerful. Being able to look those commissioners in the eye and say, hey, this decision would impact me in the following ways. That's a lot more powerful than, any talking points that we've written. But again, if you don't have solar yourself or this is all new to you, please use our talking points as much as you'd like. But otherwise, the other common themes we talked about, the regulatory certainty, resiliency to the grid, customer choice, energy independence, these are all the themes that we're really trying to hone in for the commissioners. Finish by thanking them for the opportunity to speak. And again, be as respectful as possible. This is a heated issue. I'm very passionate about it, but please be respectful to the commissioners and keep your remarks to 3 minutes. Otherwise, they will get frustrated and cut you off. So we're going to have plenty of time to answer your questions, but I just want to end the presentation by sincerely thanking all of you for attending this webinar. I believe this is the largest webinar Son of Arizona has ever hosted. And this is a really hands-on deck grassroots movement. Nothing would make my heart happier than for the commission to be absolutely packed to the gills. I think Autumn mentioned the max capacity is 145 people. So let's fill up that room and join together and tell the commission to not reopen this docket. So thank you for attending and for using your voice on this important issue. Our email addresses are right here if you have further questions, comments, or concerns about the issue. I'm sure we'll also drop those into the chat as well. But at this point, I am going to stop sharing my screen so we can start answering some questions for y'all. Okay. Let's start with a question from Norma. So if the RCP is reduced by 10% every year, doesn't that eventually end up at 0?
I can take that one real quick. So the RCP would not end up at 0 because the endpoint for the rate is the rate that the commission approved at the end of that value of solar decision. And so the final endpoint for the RCP is intended to represent, or it's intended to be equivalent to the cost that the utility would have to spend if they were to go out and build a utility scale solar project and then deliver that energy from that project to your house, to somebody's business. So the rate is quite low for TEP, and for APS it's different. We had it on a slide, but it's about 2 to 3 cents per kilowatt hour. It's much lower than what you're paying for retail electricity, but it's not 0, just quite close to it.
Thanks, Gabe. Not totally sure what the question is here, but James said that Navapachi Electric Co-op locked in my rate at 4 cents a kilowatt hour. I pay close to 15 cents a kilowatt hour.
I guess there's a couple questions about co-ops in the Q&A, and so I'll just say that yes, the co-ops also have export rates, so they are paying you for their solar. It is significantly less than those of TEP and APS for the most part. I don't know if they're directly at avoided cost. I know some of the installers that are on the phone know that, and they'll probably be disappointed to hear me say that I don't know for sure if it's avoided cost for each co-op. But the co-ops do have dramatically worse export rates. SRP also has a much worse export rate than do the 3 large investor-owned utilities, TEP, APS, and Unisource Electric.
Awesome, thanks. Thanks, Autumn. This is a really good question and something I've been asking myself a lot too. What is the justification for them discussing these 3 items? Is it just lobbying by utilities? This is a really unique situation. Oftentimes the utilities might bring something like this. Like that's kind of what we expect from these situations. But like Autumn mentioned a couple months ago, it was the commissioner, Nick Myers, who brought that original issue to the floor to reduce the RCP by more than 10%. APS and TEP had just submitted a request for the usual 10%. So I'm not sure, Autumn, Kate, anything you'd like to add to that?
I'll just add that I think I won't sometimes adds to the justifications in the commissioner's minds who brought this up. But I think one point you do hear often is this argument that utilities can go and buy utility scale solar at much cheaper rates from these giant solar farms that are out in the desert than they can relative to the value that solar customers receive for energy they export to the grid. And so that there's, solar customers are being subsidized because their rates are higher than what the utility would pay to build a utility scale solar farm. And I think what that misses is that distributed solar is really different from utility scale solar in a lot of ways. So, the really obvious example is that utility scale solar projects that are out in the desert, somewhere far away from your home, from cities, require transmission lines and distribution lines to get that energy to cities and to where people live and to homes and to businesses. And so there's a lot of costs associated with building all of that infrastructure and continuing to expand it as the energy needs of Arizona continue to expand, as people continue to, move to the state. And so, you have to account for that avoided infrastructure cost. But there's other value distributed solar provides, especially as we see technology continue to evolve. So increasingly, people are installing rooftop solar along with battery storage, which is something you can use not just to provide power at your home in case the grid goes down and to provide that resiliency benefit, but also to store solar energy that's produced in the middle of the day and then dispatch it from the battery later in the evening when solar is not available. And so electricity prices are more expensive. So distributed solar really, provides a lot of services and it is a tool that's much more flexible than utility scale solar in many ways. And so it's really not an apples to apples to comparison to say, well, 1 kilowatt hour of energy from a solar farm is equivalent to a kilowatt hour that's produced on somebody's home.
I guess I'd just add, I don't want to opine too much on my speculations for sort of the background of this. I guess what I would say is someone posted in the chat already the Myers amendment from August. He articulates the reasons why he thinks it should be dropped within that amendment, which I think, is probably helpful to look at as far as frame of mind. I will also, note that there have been a number of anti-renewable comments that have been made specifically by Commissioner Myers over the course of the year. And so, it's there's some background and history there in context as far as renewables go. And then the last thing I would say is, I don't think it comes as a surprise to anyone that the utilities, prefer generating assets that they own and earn a return on, which is not the case for distributed. The utilities tell us that they are not supportive of reopening this decision, and they are telling me that they will make that clear when they speak at the commission next week as well. But obviously, we just had testimony in the APS rate case that they are not supportive of distributed solar because it costs them money, and that was their witness under oath. And so there's a lot of background and sort of baggage and history there. But as far as this decision and the reasons for this, I think that the Myers amendment is the most illustrative as far as why we are here.
Well put. Megan was asking, what is the financial situation for the relevant utilities? Are they at risk financially?
That's a big question. Oh, go ahead, Autumn.
No, go ahead, Kate.
I was just going to say, without going into too much detail, both the utilities underwent rate cases, which are huge proceedings where they have to kind of open their books to regulators and show a lot of information about their revenue and their credit scores and things like that. And so while I'm not an expert in this area, I think it's fair to say that utilities are not struggling financially. They are doing fine.
They both testified that they are financially sound. Fortis, which is the parent company of TEP, just announced 50 years worth of dividends or something along those lines. It was record breaking, and so I don't think that this is driven by a financial decision of the utilities. Also, the costs associated with the export rate are also within an adjuster, which is a direct pass through to customers, so it doesn't actually cost them money.
Thank you. This is a really good question. William said, I had solar in California with net metering. It was a huge factor when deciding to buy solar. Why are we fighting to save chump change over ongoing decreases in RCP? What would it take to get net metering back in Arizona? Is anyone pursuing this?
Well, I jokingly ask for it in almost every contact I have with the utilities, but I don't, unless there's a very significant change at the Corporation Commission, I don't see that as being likely. Even in the 2017 decision, that was a 5-0 Republican Democrat commission with one dissenting vote, Bob Burns, also a Republican, but the winds of the political winds of the commission are not blowing towards net metering, and we've seen attacks on net metering in lots of other states. California actually just underwent some changes to their net metering rules, and so this is not necessarily unique to Arizona, and I think has a lot to do with lobbying and the popularity of distributed resources with the utilities.
Absolutely. Anything you'd like to add, Kate? I'm still seeing a few questions about which utilities are impacted and which aren't. Kate or Autumn, could one of you just clarify with rural electric co-ops and tribal utilities, how are they impacted by this?
Well, tribal entities, so SRP and any tribal utility is not regulated by the commission. So that's also true for any municipal utility. So there's a couple, like Mesa has a small municipal utility. They're not regulated by the commission. So that it wouldn't be the rate itself, and the value of solar decision would not be applicable to them. You as a voter, it's still very applicable to, and the impact of the industry on the state is still applicable to, but the rules themselves do not apply. The co-ops, TEP, Unisource Electric, and APS are all regulated by the ACC, and we're specifically for sure talking about TEP, APS, and Unisource's export rates.
Thank you. And so ED3, that's a co-op, right? The electric district. Yeah. Cool. All right. Next question. Are there no federal laws, rules, or restrictions addressing the compensation rates?
That's a good question. There really aren't. There are some federal laws that address compensation rates for really large customers. Like if you were to go out and as a business build a solar farm and you wanted to contract to sell that electricity to the grid, there's some federal rules that apply in that case. But the entity that sort of regulates federal electricity federally, which is FERC, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, really does not weigh in on state policies related to compensating solar customers, which is why you see, as I showed on that slide, that most states have net metering, but there's a little bit of a patchwork of some states like Arizona that do have a different policy in place.
I guess I don't want to muddy the waters too much, but I will just mention that there was a lawsuit against SRP that was decided at the Ninth Circuit last year that had to do with antitrust regulation and export rates, or rates for solar customers. And so there are, some other federal mechanisms that are sometimes in play, but not the export rate specific for the utilities that we're talking about at the Utility Commission.
Great, thanks. This one I actually don't know the answer to. I would need to know some history, but why is SRP exempt from the commission?
SRP is basically, I don't know if it's constitutional or statutory, but they're carved out specifically. They're basically, they're like the municipal utilities. They're kind of a state agency. They're an agricultural improvement district, and it's an old history that has to do with with irrigation districts and building of dams and other hydroelectric things more than 100 years ago. And so that's just sort of a historical remnant that exists on its own. And I would love that to be relooked at, but the utilities are very effective at lobbying the legislature. And so I don't see that as being particularly plausible in the near future.
SRP is a weird one, kind of a unicorn. Sean asked, why don't the power companies pay rooftop generators the same for kilowatt hours they charge us, minus their investment in relevant infrastructure? Like an ounce of gold has a market price, so should a kilowatt hour. This is a fairness issue. Any chance of getting a more favorable rate?
I could take that question. And it's interesting that the RCP, the export rate, as it's sort of designed, is intended to represent sort of what you're describing, what utilities would pay for scale solar minus the investments in the infrastructure that you need to get there. But I'll add that when you really try to get down to what is the value of a kilowatt hour of rooftop solar energy, it gets really complicated really fast, and there's other value categories that are hard to quantify, like what's the value of having distributed solar across our grid, improving community resilience. And so that is what the export rate is intended to represent, and that's why it's really important to ensure that the export rate is fair and reasonable and recognizes all of those benefits that distributed generation provides to the grid.
I guess I would just say that I think that question is very similar to what is the chance of getting net metering back in Arizona? It's a really similar sort of topic.
Russell wanted to know, is the RCP decision in September now void? No. So the September decision reduced the RCP rate by 10%, which had previously happened each year. So currently, where we stand right this moment, that is the law of the land. So if you're an APS customer, it dropped from somewhere around 8 cents to 7 cents per kilowatt hour. So that's in place now. But the commission is considering reopening the original decision that established the RCP back in 2017. So again, any changes they make to that would completely change the entire way that this system is operated.
And there's a distinction that might be important to a small subset of folks, which is that the RCP rate that applies to you depends on, and Autumn and Adrian, tell me if this is wrong, but it's the date that you apply to interconnect your system to the utility. And so, if you are someone who maybe applied to interconnect solar, say back in early September, and you're still waiting to install the panels, then that's the date that's relevant to decide which export rate you get, not the date that the system's installed or anything like that.
Yeah, and I was just going to add procedurally, I don't know what will happen. My assumption would be that until they make a change to the value of solar decision, whatever the RCP rate is now will remain in effect. But if they were to reopen the decision and then completely reevaluate things, or retroactively apply changes to grandfathering or 10-year lock-in, then yes, that could potentially undo the RCP rate that you are at now, or your net meter rate. But I would think that until we get to that point, if they open it, then they probably will leave things in place as is, though I have absolutely no idea because I don't know that this has ever happened before.
Yeah, this is a game changer for sure. So if you installed solar, you had the RCP rate, you're locked into 10 years, but what happens after that 10 years is up? Do you go down to whatever that current RCP rate is of that year?
Yeah, that is what happens. So the RCP rate that's effective in 10 years from now is what would be in effect for customers once you've had solar for 10 years.
Which would most likely, if the 10% decrease holds annually, be the avoided cost rate.
Diane was wondering, do we know the general mix of where our electricity comes from here in the Phoenix metro area? I feel like I have a general sense of this, but wondering if Kate has a better answer.
Yeah, that's a great question. I don't have that numbers handy kind of for this for tonight, but it depends on your utilities. So APS and TEP both purchase electricity from different different power plants, or have different power plants that they own and operate and get electricity from. So it depends on your utility. There's some information on your utility's website typically about where the electricity comes from. Fortunately, both utilities are installing solar and storage in increasing amounts, so it's getting cleaner over time. Arizona is a little bit unique in that a pretty large percentage of energy does come from nuclear and from the Palo Verde nuclear plant for the state as a whole. But for all utilities in Arizona, a fairly substantial portion of electricity is still from coal plants, and most utilities have determined retirement dates for their coal plants that are in the next decade or so. And then the remaining portion is a pretty large percentage comes from natural gas plants.
Yeah, I just was going to add that it's not going to be Phoenix Metro specific. So you would just have to look at the generation portfolio of your utility. So if you live in Phoenix, it's either going to be SRP or APS, and they will have that information on their website and in their resource plans. I will say one little weird thing about Arizona is also that those are demand percentages, not supply percentages. So when APS says we're 50% clean, they're including energy efficiency and demand response in that calculation. It does not mean that 50% of the power that they generate is clean. And I think that's really confusing for people.
Yeah, very important distinction. This may seem like a non sequitur, but any news on the energy storage front, then we can just cut ourselves off the grid. I'm with you there, Elizabeth. I'm
Yeah,
assuming...
that's a
Go for it.
great question. I saw some questions about energy storage in the chat too as well. I think that the cost of energy storage is coming down and it's getting more affordable, and there's more options out there to install. Realistically, I think most people, when they go to install storage, find that the cost of installing enough storage to totally cut yourself off from the grid is pretty expensive, unless you're, pretty low energy user or you're really off grid somewhere. It's pretty expensive. But batteries can still provide a lot of value, even if you're not installing enough batteries to fully, have yourself off the grid every day of the year. And so, you can, with battery storage, you can configure it to set up, to provide power to kind of a select number of appliances to make sure, say, your fridge keeps going so that your food doesn't spoil if there's an outage. But where batteries have a ton of value is really when they're used on a day-to-day basis, not by the person who has the battery in their home or in their garage, but to provide energy to the grid. And so there's times of the day, times of the year when energy is much, much more expensive for utilities to procure. And so if customers individually have batteries at home that you're not using because the grid is functioning normally and you don't need it, and you can use that energy to store up solar power during the day and then discharge it later in the evening when the utility is purchasing energy at higher rates, that provides a lot of economic value and then reliability value, because it's another tool that utilities can turn to when Arizona's in an extended 30-day heat wave, and utilities across the Southwest are all scrambling to purchase energy to help meet customers' air conditioning loads. So it's a lot of value. It's something that I think utilities are working to figure out. If you're an APS customer, there is a incentive program where they'll pay you upfront to install a battery to use exactly for that purpose. I think it's closed to new customers now, but the utility has plans to reopen it in the future. If you're a TEP customer, the utility does not have a program like that yet, but you can let them know that you want to install a battery to help provide energy back to the grid, and that's something you'd be interested in.
Yeah, I guess I just would add that AirSea has proposed programs in which you would be able to basically use your battery to do what Kate is describing in a virtual power plant kind of arrangement. The utilities have opposed those proposals in both of their rate cases. We continue to pursue that, but my installers tell me that basically with the export rates, current status in TEP and likely status in APS within the next year, that unless you have a battery where you can basically, sell power back to the grid, not be off grid, but sell power back to the grid at times that are advantageous to you, the systems are not economic.
Also, just to add one other thing, some municipalities do have restrictions on off-grid homes as part of their building code. So some cities restrict your ability to fully cut the cord, if you will, from your utility. But oftentimes in rural areas, if you're out in the county, that, certainly an option. This question from Michael, I don't fully understand. So, Michael, I'm not sure if we're missing the point here, but you said that you got estimates for houses in Tempe, which was SRP, and Sedona, which is APS for solar. Similar houses, payback time in Sedona was 13 years and Tempe was 18 years. So maybe the commission is having some positive effect. So the payback periods, what you described, definitely makes sense for an SRP versus an APS system, just because of the way that the utilities structure their rates differently for solar customers. I just don't understand what you mean by having positive effect.
I think he just means, I think he means that being regulated by the commission has resulted in a higher export rate than SRP has just sort of unilaterally determined to do on their own, which is the case. Well, but you're talking about a paradigm that currently exists, and we're talking about the ACC completely undermining the existing paradigm, and so that would no longer be true should they revisit this decision.
That makes total sense. Sorry, Michael, I missed that. Malcolm wanted to know if the ACC's ultimate goal is just to eliminate rooftop solar. I cannot pretend to speculate on behalf of the commissioners. I really recommend Autumn's advice of looking at Commissioner Meyer's filing from last month, of looking through some of the reasons he cited behind this decision and his desire to reduce rates even further. I have met personally with Commissioner Myers and Thompson, and I'm just going to choose my words very carefully here, but I don't know. I'll just leave it at that.
And, there's 5 commissioners and they all have a vote in the decision, and you can learn more about what they think on these issues by, looking at policy statements they've published on the website, or just what they've, said in their kind of presentations and public engagements as commissioners.
Thanks, Kate. And this kind of goes back to earlier again, like what's the why? Cindy said, if the utility companies are saying they are not interested in the proposed change, which they have said publicly, why is Meyer pushing for this? Or are the utility companies just not being truthful? Who is really behind it then?
I think that might be the same question. I don't know if that's a different question. I mean, we don't know. I mean, technically to meet with the commissioners, you need to be registered as a lobbyist, but they don't obviously disclose those meetings or have to say which lobbyists influence them or not, or whether or not there are specific organizations that, have pushed certain policies that they're adopting. We wouldn't have any reason to know that. The only, besides speculation in the rumor mill, I would just recommend, again, looking at Myers' statement. He says that there is subsidization of solar and that he is against all subsidies. There was an article that was published on this topic recently, and maybe some inconsistencies there with 12 News. If you haven't seen that segment or that article, then that might be a place to start. But we don't know anything beyond what the statements that he has made publicly.
Anything you'd like to close with, Kate or Autumn? I will just close with saying thank you for attending, those of you who are still left. Again, the commission's meeting is on Wednesday. We'll be there at 9:30 for a press conference. Meeting starts at 10, but please show up early. We would love to see you there, to meet with you, and to join together. Really appreciate it.
I saw a question at one point asking how many participants we had, and the highest I saw was 135, although maybe someone else was paying closer attention. So that sounds like enough people if you can find 10 more friends to pack the commission room on Wednesday.
Yeah, I guess I would just close with, we absolutely need people to take action based on this webinar. The webinar is not the point. The outreach to commissioners is the point. And so you need to call or email commissioners like now and leave messages and flood their inbox in opposition. Please use docket number 14-0023. in any written comments, and we need people to show up. We're doing the press conference at 9:30 on Wednesday the 11th at 1200 West Washington, and we need you to be there for that, and then we need you to stick around for this item. We'd like it to be standing room only. We would like the commissioners to see that this is not a road that they would like to go down, because it's going to be, kind of a circus, but also that this is something that people that vote in ACC elections care about, and there is no reason to upset 270,000 voters who wouldn't normally have made it all the way down to the bottom of the ballot without some, obvious reason, like attacking their pocketbooks.
Perfect. Thanks.
There you have it. Definitely something to take a look at. Definitely something to click the QR code, put the link in the chat. Take action, email the commissioners, show up 9:30, October 11th. Might extend to the 12th too, depending on how aggressive this gets. But it's definitely something that if you have solar now, you have net metering, you're grandfathered in, or you're looking at solar down the road, this is something that really impacts people. And again, they hit on one thing that I thought was super important, which is like, even if you don't have solar and you hate solar and you just think it's a scam and whatever it is, and you've been kind of, hurt by a door-to-door or a phone call or whatever it is, and you're just really off on solar, that's totally fine. It's not for you. Don't do it. But your friends and your family who do have solar, they will be affected so bad. And the commissioners, like the ACC is not just solar. Like, they approve a wide range of laws and regulations here in Arizona. And you want these people to be truthful, and you want these people to be by your side. And Commissioner Myers, like, literally, they even said his quote, which I was super excited about. But like, his quote is like, "Let's stop changing the rules in the middle of the game." And he's the one who's voting to change the rules in the middle of the game. So I think it's really silly that he's doing this. And I think it really shows more to his character than anything else. So I highly recommend you guys, use the QR code below, or find the link in the chat. You'd be able to just kind of use their form. It'll email over to the commissioners. It'll do a lot of the work for you. I highly recommend you do that, though. Take action. If they get this, then it's going to really screw a lot of people over, and it's also going to set the stage for other states to do this as well. And again, it's just one of those things that just, you give them an inch, they're going to take a mile. So I highly recommend you check it out. I highly recommend you do something that can take action for this, because it's going to help more people than just you or your one day I'll go solar type thing. This is a bigger thing, and it's really something we should be kind of aware of. So I hope this helped. I hope this made some sense. We're going to have this replay floating around everywhere. So if you missed the first half of it, totally fine. Just check the replay, but use the QR code here to get started. And let's hope this thing works out. But I'll see you guys October 11th at the rally, if I can get out of here. What is the 11th? Oh yeah, definitely. Yeah. Anyway, take care, guys. Stay blessed. Know you're loved, and you matter.